Yo, what's up everyone, Nick here from Rad Dad Builds. So in this video, I wanted to show you exactly how I built this super rad epoxy and wood Shoreline side table. And I must say it turned out sweet, so stay tuned. So this is my dovetail saw. I like to use this for my fine joinery and for cutting down rough slabs. Oh, I didn't want to do that. That's what you get for showing off. You f things up. Oh well. That's okay. So once I got my piece roughly to size, I flattened one edge and one face on my jointer. I then brought it down to the thickness that I wanted using my thickness planer. If you don't have a jointer and a planer, this can easily be done using a router sled. What you see me here holding is a wire brush attachment for my drill. This is what I use to clean up the live edge. I remove all the loose wood and the bark from the live edge. This just helps enhance the bond between the epoxy when you pour it. On the top face of the slab, I put a real thin coat of 1 coat polyurethane. This just stops the bleeding from the coloured pigment in the epoxy. It all gets removed during the sanding stage. While that's drying, I spent some time building the form. Here I'm using a sheet of plywood that was used for a larger table that I made a few weeks ago, so I just cut it down into smaller pieces. It's essentially a sheet of plywood covered in sheathing or construction tape. I always make my form a couple inches larger than I want my final dimensions of my table to be. That way I can cut out any deficiencies that may happen during the curing stage. Once I've cut the base of the form, I cut 4 4-inch strips for the sides. I attach my sides to the base of my form using silicone and a pin gun. You can use a countersinking wood screws as well, it does the same thing. So you want to make sure that the underside of the form is flat and flush with the 4-inch strip. I repeated these steps on both sides. Using the same techniques as before, I sealed up the 2 ends. I then flipped the form over and taped up all the seams. You want to make sure that the form is 100% watertight because epoxy is damn expensive. On the underside of the slab, I siliconed around all the cracks and the holes in the live edge. This just stops all the epoxy from escaping underneath and being wasted. did the same to the top of the slab, creating a dam effect for the epoxy, and then I clamped my slab down to my form, making sure it's nice and flat. Because this table was made at the peak of summer, I brought it down to a cooler section in my shop. I set it up on 2 trestles and then I shimmed it level. You want to make sure it's nice and level so that way all the epoxy doesn't build up at one end. For this table I'm using Epoxy's liquid plastic 2:1 mix ratio. I'm also using Black Diamond Pigment's Cobalt Blue. The way I calculate how much epoxy I need is real easy. I measure the width of the void that I want to fill, I get that measurement, then I times that by the length, then I times that by the thickness, and then I divide that number by 61. Once I've fully mixed the epoxy, I let it sit for about half an hour before pouring. This allows all the air bubbles to rise to the top and escape. Pouring multiple layers nice and slow, allowing about 15 minutes in between each layer, allows for all the bubbles to rise to the top and pop on their own. Because Epoxy's liquid plastic 2:1 mix ratio allows 72 hours to cure, I don't feel the need to seal the live edge. The 72-hour cure time allows for all the off gases and the bubbles to rise to the top and burst on their own. And personally, I feel not sealing the live edge creates a better bond between the epoxy and the wood. If you're impatient like me, you can always get a blowtorch or a heat gun and burst the bubbles manually. It's also really satisfying. Once the epoxy had fully cured, I then took it out the form. Because the top is now wider than my jointer and my planer, I have to take off all the high spots using my router sled. I have a more in-depth video of my router sled and how I built it, so I'll link that video in the description down below. I removed all the router marks left behind from the router sled using 80 grit sandpaper in my sander. I then cut it to its final size using my track saw. I gave all faces a good sand, going from 80 grit all the way up to 320 grit. In between each grit, I give the table a good dust down and a wipe down with mineral spirits. This just helps eat up all the dust. For the finish, I use Osmo Oil Poly X. I start off spreading the oil around using a spreader, thinly and evenly across the whole slab. buff the oil to dry using a white pad and my polish sander. I let that dry overnight and then I repeated the steps a second time. I let the second coat to dry for 24 hours and then I gave it a couple of sprays using Osmo's liquid wax. I then buffed it out, leaving a perfect sheen. I flipped the top upside down and started marking out the positions for the legs. And at the center of each hole. I then drilled out and screwed in my threaded inserts. Then repeated this process on both legs. And now it's ready for the final inspection. Did you like it?
Yeah. Please, if I could test it.
A little touch. Just one little one. That's enough.
Yeah, you polished it.
And there you go. I'm really happy how this turned out, considering this is slightly different to my usual style of epoxy tables. I just love the contrast between the light maple and the sea blue epoxy. It just gives it that beachy feel. And I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. If you had any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to ask me down below. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I would appreciate that so much. If you want to see some more day-to-day stuff, go follow @RadDadBuilds on Instagram. I'll link all the products that I use in the description down below. And as always, stay rad. Peace.